Will my existing or to-be existing fence meet North Carolina building code requirements for my in-ground swimming pool? Let's take a look at the facts and let's get you some answers. Before we dive in, let's go ahead and identify the anatomy of a traditional picket fence so that we can make sure we are all reading from the same page. Behind me is a perfect example. Right here is a gate. This is just your regular fence. This is a latch or a lock. These are your horizontal members. They're going horizontally, and these are your vertical members. They're going vertically. Some of the more basic requirements for a fence is that it must be at least 48 inches tall. The gates must be self-closing and self-latching, and they must swing away from the pool. And the latch itself must be 54 inches measured from the bottom of the gate or the ground. And another thing inspectors will look for is the gap at the bottom of the fence. They typically refer to this as vertical clearance. The distance between your bottom of the fence and the ground should not exceed 4 inches. But that's just the surface of making sure your fence meets pool code. There's a few other pieces of code that you want to make sure you read before purchasing a fence or before thinking your existing fence will meet pool code. Some of those details would include the distances between vertical and horizontal members. So what do I mean by that? If you look here, this fence is comprised of 3 horizontal members, one at the bottom, one at the middle, and one at the top. The distance between this bottom horizontal member and this middle horizontal member, if it was to be less than 45 inches, the distance between your vertical members cannot exceed 1.75 inches. If the distance between your bottom horizontal member and your middle horizontal member is 45 inches or more, then the maximum gap between your vertical members cannot exceed 4 inches. And that's one of those common details that are very easy to overlook. For example, if you have a 4-foot tall fence and it has 3 horizontal members, chances are the distance between your bottom horizontal member and your middle horizontal member will be less than 45 inches. And if that's the case, the distance between your vertical members must only be 1.75 inches. However, it's hard to find a fence that is only 1.75 inch gap. And that's exactly why we traditionally recommend going with a fence a little bit taller than 48 inches. Typically 54 inches we have found is the sweet spot. And there's 2 reasons for that. For one, it makes fence shopping a lot easier. If you go with a fence that is 54 inches tall, chances are the distance between these 2 members will exceed 45 inches, meaning that your vertical distance will be perfectly fine, no questions asked. Another reason we highly recommend going with a slightly taller fence is inspectors are going to measure the height of your fence from grade. So let's say the ground and the earth on the outside of your fence is built up, or it's a little bit higher. You know, it's not perfectly flat. And let's say it's 2 inches higher. Well, now your 48 inch tall fence is only 46 inches tall, and that won't pass code as well. Now, don't get me wrong, not all inspectors are going to be as strict as the code may seem. However, if you don't meet the code, then technically you are at a violation, and you could potentially run the risk of an inspector going to your house, failing you, and now either have to have your existing fence modified or you have to have a new fence installed and your existing one removed. And that's just not fun. Most of us don't account for that type of expense. And whenever you're doing a project to this scale, it's really important to make sure that everything lines up with how you originally planned, as much as you can at least. Now, I know we primarily only talked about a traditional black aluminum picket fence because that is what we mostly install. However, the building code we went over in this video essentially applies to every style of fence. Right directly behind me, I have a white vinyl privacy fence. This fence would 100% meet building code. Even though there are vertical members and horizontal members, there's no gaps. So this is essentially just a 6-foot tall wall. So as long as the gates are swinging outward away from the pool, and as long as the gates are self-closing and self-latching, and as long as the latch is 54 inches above the ground, I shouldn't have any problem getting an inspector's approval on this fence. Now, I am going to attach a link in the description of the video that will take you to a direct copy of the fence code. So that way, if you ever have any questions or any suspicions about an existing fence or a new fence, you can compare that to with what's written on the building code. But that is more or less what I went over in this video. However, there are a few variances that might be worth considering and might be applicable to your specific setup. Now, building code at the end of the day is code, so it can be hard to interpret. Always recommend that if you have any trouble, reach out to your project planner and we'll be happy to sit down with you or talk on the phone and go over your fence and verify if it's going to be sufficient for getting that final inspection once your pool is installed. Another thing you can do is you can reach out to your county or city's building or inspection department. They should be able to help you and point you in the right direction and make sure that any fence you have or will have is going to meet building code. But that should be everything. If you have any questions, just let us know. And thank you for watching this video. I'm happy to help.